I'm Yvonne Hamoud, registered social worker and owner of New Moon Counseling. But out of the office, I'm a mom, wife, daughter, sister, and friend. Join me each week as I sit with a special guest to discuss everyday things that impact our mental health. We'll be chatting about everything from mental health and relationships to media and current events, as well as personal experiences and reflections, all in the hopes of normalizing our humanness and helping you see that you're not alone. This is Outside the Therapy Room. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Outside the Therapy Room. Alex is back with us this week as well. Hi, Alex.
Hey, everybody.
I do think we need to note that this is our last episode of 2024. And I just, before we get started into our episode, just want to say thank you so much to all of our guests and all of our listeners and everyone that has, shared positive comments and given us feedback. It really means so much. As you guys know from the first episode, I was super freaked out about doing this. It's been so fun and now something that I've looked forward to. So thank you so much. And yeah, now let's get into our topic. So Christmas is next week. Things are, last week we talked about the mental load that we deal with over the holidays. And I think a big thing that we also experience a lot during the holidays is grief. For anyone who's either going or has gone through a loss of a loved one, the end of a relationship, the end of a friendship, or just shifts and different changes within the family, there can be a lot of feelings of loss over the holidays, especially as we look at traditions. And I don't know about your house, but at my house, it's always at my parents' house. It's always at one person's house. There's a certain tradition that we hold that one person kind of does this thing. And when we lose that person or there's a shift in the dynamic, it can be really hard to kind of keep up with those traditions. So yeah, we're talking about grief over the holidays.
No, I think that I even talked about it a little bit in the last episode that it's so busy and when we try to match those traditions, sometimes it makes it hard. And talking about grief today even goes into that area of change, right? We're grieving these changes that are happening anyways. It doesn't always have to be losing someone. Sometimes it's just about losing the normalcy. I think in the actual traditions or the normal ways you do things. Like you said, it's always at your parents' house. It was at my brother's house for as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
And now I've switched it over to take on that load of cooking and doing all the work. So we can also provide more space in different areas. So it's been a different shift, but a good one. So yeah, I think it's important to note those differences and how grief can show up for different people in different areas anyways.
Yeah, I think when we speak about grief, there's so many different ways to view grief. A lot of the times people think that grief means the death of somebody close to us.
Yeah.
And yes, obviously, there's a lot of grief that we feel in that. But as you pointed out, it's also grief of change, grief of losing relationships, losing touch with people. It's also grief of losing things like losing your job or losing, a routine that you had. It can also be grieving the things that we wish we had, the things that we long to have. And so for a lot of people, the holidays, while it's filled with family time, and we talked about this last week, Christmas magic, all of these things, for some other people, it just highlights the sense of loneliness that they feel if they don't have those things. And so grieving what they want, the longing of, wishing they had a family and traditions and all of these things. So it can be really, really a really tough time during the holidays to have that.
I think you said something important too when you're talking about our last episode where we were talking about this magic that as parents we try to create over the holidays. But I think it's sometimes hard to remember that magic is not always there for everybody. Right? Magic is something that is unavailable for some people because of what they're feeling. And like you said, with especially the loss of job, it's you're losing a sense of your freedom to be able to really make the holidays something maybe magical. And I don't think that we necessarily have to focus on finances and what we're able to offer our families as that magic. But that is a huge shift in what you're dealing with, and that's its own grief in itself as well. And when we're tying back into like that magic and the mental load, that part of it is also contributing to that grief feeling and that lost feeling, and maybe that isolation, loneliness, and sadness as well. Right?
Yeah, like it's a huge change.
Yeah.
And not like, again, like you mentioned, not to add on top of that the financial piece of it. It's just, yeah, that's really tough. I was thinking too about grief of like just general change. Like when my kids were little, our traditions were like, when they were really, really, really little, like our traditions were a little bit different. There was a little bit more of that magic. So there was more excitement. They would like, their little innocent selves were super cute in some of those traditions that we would have. Whereas now, I think my mom is grieving a lot that my oldest is now not always wanting to play certain things. And so I think it's also just acknowledging the grief of those changes. And I'm sure in a few years, I'm going to grieve that joy. Like the kids maybe aren't going to be asking for toys anymore. I think you talked about this in the last episode that your daughter now is asking for like one big thing instead of a bunch of cute little toys that you would always be so excited to get with them, right? And so there is just a lot of grief that we can experience in many different ways.
Yeah, it does look very different. And I think trying to remind ourselves that the more and more we try to push to make something meet an expectation or meet this idea that we have around the holidays, sometimes can push us into that grief state. When, it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be into that grief state. There's nothing wrong with that. But if we're pushing ourselves into those feelings, we have to know how to deal with those feelings, right? And it's already a very overwhelming and hectic time. So when you add that into those additional feelings that might be happening, it feels catastrophic. Of course it does. And we all feel that way. But I think it's so important to actually understand for ourselves what we need and like what others need. We can't always be aware of everything for everybody, but I think if we're at least pushing on awareness of what this is going to look like for us, or what we're putting ourselves through, or if it is the loss of somebody, like giving ourselves a little bit of grace. Right? Like it's okay to not have the holidays look the same. It's okay to not want to put more stress on things. It's okay to pull back from normal things and figure it out as we go, right? There's no game plan as much as you would love to have one at every circumstance. Can't always be that way. Right? There
needs to be flexibility for whatever we're needing in that moment. The one analogy that I really like when it comes to grief is grief in a jar. So if we look at grief as this ball in a jar, we think that over time our grief is going to get smaller in that jar. But in reality, we grow around our grief. Our grief stays the same size ball and our jar is just getting bigger. Right? And I think, it's about giving yourself that time and that space to feel what you need to feel. And that can be hard around the holidays because I feel like everyone's shoving happiness down your throat.
Absolutely.
Be happy, magical time, once in a lifetime, like, once a year experience, all of these things. But if you're having a really difficult time around the holidays and you are grieving or you're feeling some strong feelings, give yourself permission to feel them. In, whatever time you need. I think we've talked a lot about timers on this podcast, but set a timer for like 15 minutes, go put on some sad music, have a good cry, do what you need to do to allow you to have space to grieve. And then after that, sure, if you need to go and distract by watching a holiday movie or baking cookies, or maybe it's, making a recipe of a loved one, for the holidays, like then you can go and do those things, but at least you gave yourself that space for your emotions to exist without pushing them down.
And I think it's in like when we talk about this idea, like give yourself space to do that. I think it's also okay. We say like prepare. I don't think you can prepare for grief, right? It happens and we don't know what actual things are going to bring up those moments of sadness. But I think it's okay to expect that you are going to be vulnerable. In many different situations over the holidays, whether you prepared for them or not. I mean, I would love for everybody to be prepared. that would be beautiful.
We love being prepared.
We love preparedness.
So we would love if everyone else was.
But like not attainable.
Yeah.
Right? There's going to be things like maybe a child walks up to you and says something, reminds you, and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to school my face. It's got to be perfect. No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It's okay to let people know that you're sad. It's okay to let people know that you're struggling. Letting people kind of support that, and at least giving yourself the expectation that is actually helpful in the way that like your mood doesn't have to be perfect. The expectation is I'm going to be a mess. And when I'm a mess, that's okay. I'm with the people that I love the most. And hopefully that people can at least show up and
be
let
respectful.
You be you.
Yeah. I think the communication piece can be helpful. Like just letting people know, hey, like the holidays are going to be a little tough for me. Yeah. I want to be included in all these wonderful festivities, but depending on the day, I might have to not show up or stay home or have a quieter time. So at least people can expect that. Yeah. And it also doesn't feel as hard needing to fake it. Right?
Absolutely.
We can put so many masks on when we're experiencing a variety of feelings, including grief. And those masks don't always need to be on. It can be really exhausting to constantly be masking in situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's okay to give yourself permission to shift the way it looks, right? If that means you can't spend time with family because you've lost somebody, or you're feeling grief because you haven't met the expectations you think are set out for you from your family or yourself. And there's even like embarrassment or like a feeling of like letdown, because that happens sometimes with grief, especially in those areas. I think it's okay to say, you know what, I'm just not going to be part of these big dinners. I'm not going to be part of these huge Christmas events, but maybe switching them and saying, you know what, this year I'm going to have a friend's Christmas. This year I'm just going to spend time with my kid, and we're just going to have a pajama party with hot chocolate and movies and games. Great. Right? We can make it what we want it to be. We just have to give ourselves permission to do so and be okay with the fact that we're choosing that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's like our maintaining those boundaries that we need.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's important, and I think it's a very important time to do it because you're acting on the fact that there's additional emotions and ways you're feeling, but then there's also a hectic time of year. There's heightened expectations from every single person because unfortunately that's the way Christmas has been made into, right?
Yeah.
But I think that if we're able to communicate, like you said, actually lay out those boundaries and reinforce them if you've already laid them out. Because I hear a lot that people are like, they have boundaries, they know, and they're still not listening. Okay, then you do need to reinforce and maybe take a step back. But I think listening to ourselves first is always going to be the best first step. Right?
Yeah, and taking things slowly too. I think depending on what your loss looks like, if it's the loss of a loved one, other family members might be feeling the same way. And so being able to acknowledge like, hey, this Christmas might look a little bit different as we're coping with the loss. If it's a recent loss, you know, while we're coping with the loss of this loved one, let's give that space for us to maybe have a quieter Christmas, to have our own traditions and rituals that we want to have to celebrate this loved one that is no longer with us. So just, again, the communication piece can be so helpful, and it can also help make people feel less alone.
Yeah.
Sometimes when we voice it, other people are like, yeah, you know what, actually, I was thinking the same thing, but was maybe too scared to share it, or was worried about how everyone else would take it if we want to have a quieter Christmas instead of our traditional, you know, big Christmas party. So I think the communication and just the being honest with what you're needing, it can also create an opportunity for someone else to also speak up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that communication piece is probably one of the most important things, because not only is it helping, I mean, and some people don't like to heal this way, but communicating your needs, talking about this grief, talking about a loved one that has passed, talking about maybe that loss of a job or friends, is actually really healing when we give the chance to actually understand where all of these emotions are coming from. We talk about emotions nonstop, broken records again. But of course we do, right? They're so important. So I think like actually reiterating over and over again, these communication piece is always going to be like this first line of defense, right?
Yeah.
We have to talk about it. We're allowed to grieve. We're allowed to talk about the sad things. We're allowed to talk about the happy things.
Yeah.
And that brings out guilt all the time. But you can still grieve and be happy, sad, angry, frustrated, all of the things. But there's always going to be commonalities in those feelings, especially over the holidays.
Yeah.
Maybe they're not going to connect over that grief, but they will connect over the feelings at some level. And maybe that's going to help you work through that feeling.
Right? And being able to give yourself that time to process those feelings, or, okay, we've talked about it before, like we said, broken record, but sometimes we have an emotion and that emotion is valid.
Yeah.
But the behavior that can sometimes follow that emotion isn't always
Absolutely
valid, right? With grief, that is a very, very strong and difficult emotion, one that we try to avoid a lot of the times. And what can sometimes happen is that while we feel grief, our anger takes over.
Yeah.
And then we are behaving angrily. Maybe we're more aggressive. Maybe we are, behaving in a way that is pushing people away or being disrespectful of them. But really in there, we're suffering and we're having a really, really hard time finding the words or giving ourselves the space to be vulnerable with certain people. And so when we give ourselves that time to just be like, okay, wait a second, what am I feeling? I'm feeling grief. I'm feeling grief because I was longing for this experience that I don't have right now, or I'm, grieving the loss of this person that I care about, or, I just broke up with my partner and now I don't want to talk to anybody.
Yeah.
See all the cute holiday couples like at the part, or not holiday couples at the holiday party. Like that might be really hard. And so anger is an emotion that really tries to protect us. It tries to keep us safe by pushing people away, but it's not always going to be helpful for us and for the relationships we have. And it's only going to drive us more into isolation and loneliness.
Yeah. And I talk about this a lot in session, where anger is one of the easiest emotions to feel.
Yeah.
Right? Like it makes us reactive. It gives us something to give that outlet. And like you said, it's not always helpful. But I mean, it's also okay to be like, I need to take a step back. I realize I'm angry. I need to figure out what I'm angry about.
Yes.
And I say this quite often when I'm talking to some of my clients is sometimes one of the most helpful things when they're dealing with anger is getting outside. And sometimes I'm like, throw a rock at a tree for like whatever works for you.
Snowballs at a fence.
Yeah. Like skip rocks in the water. As long as you're going and trying to understand and to like be intentional about trying to have that outlet, you're doing so much good for yourself, even being outdoors and trying to give yourself that self-care. But we have the ability to let go of this anger.
Yeah.
We just have to be honest with ourselves that it's there. And it's okay to be there.
Anger, again, it's important. It can be helpful at times. It can motivate us. It can keep us safe. It can keep us surviving. But other times it's damaging to our relationships or ourselves. So,
And I always say, sometimes everybody can't get outside. The best one, scream into your pillow. Wake up in the morning, scream into your pillow, be angry. It's fine.
Put on some angry music and dance like angry.
Like it's fine. We're supposed to be angry.
Yeah.
We can't ignore that emotion. But you're right. Like bringing that into other circumstances and other gatherings and around people that might not know how to deal with those emotions, we have to actually still be aware of our surroundings. We have to be aware of how we are showing up.
Yeah.
And I think like that constant check-in, that self-care, that really taking a step back and understanding what you're feeling is so important. And again, communicating, like you said, right?
I think one piece that you mentioned, or I don't know if you mentioned it today, but it was something that came up actually in my life where someone was like, there was an anniversary of a loss and they had forgotten that that was the anniversary of the loss.
Yeah.
But their body didn't. Their body had a reaction.
Our body never forgets.
Yeah. And I think that, that's called anniversary reaction, where there's a strong emotional or physical reaction that relates to important dates to our loved one, like a birthday, the day they passed, an anniversary. That can bring up such intense feelings. And sometimes mentally we forget, or we see it on the calendar, but we avoid it in some ways, but our body still has that emotional response. And so when you mention like a kiddo bringing something up and then you're triggered in that moment, that can be really hard.
Yeah.
But like you pointed out, like that's okay. It's happening. And so being mindful of how your body's also feeling, how your body's holding on to some of those emotions or that loss or that grief. And is there something that you can do? Like you pointed out, throwing rocks at the water, or throwing snowballs at the fence or the side of a wall, screaming into a pillow. Like all of these are very physical things that we can do. Exercise is also a great one. Yoga, doing anything that, you know, brings our body, or where we're able to kind of direct that angry energy we have out, is going to be helpful. So it is really important for you to also pay attention to your body through that, and just make sure that, you know, if there is an anniversary coming up, or if you had a loss really close to the holidays, you can do some preparedness beforehand, as you mentioned. And then on the day of, just again, what is important to you? Is there a ritual, a routine, something that you want to do to treat yourself? I have someone in my life who takes themselves out for coffee and for lunch on the anniversary of their loved ones passing, because that is what they used to do with that person. And so they still do that, but they do that on their own, and they have a quieter time. They communicate with family. Like, hey, it's the anniversary. Everybody knows, like, it's the anniversary. This person's going to be a little bit more quiet, and we're going to give them that space. So there can be some of that planning and preparation beforehand, especially around the holidays.
And I like that you go into planning more in depth, because I think it's also okay to make a plan for the holidays, right? Like, we know, I think we all know what we need to do over the holidays, subconsciously at least. And I think it's okay to make a list of things that normally need to get done, right? And finding out that maybe I don't feel like doing that this year, right? Like, do I really want to do this? No? Okay. Or do I need to do it because I want to make sure that I'm honoring somebody else? Great. But like, in that, it's also okay to change the list. Make a list. It doesn't mean you have to check everything off of it.
Yeah.
It lets you actually see, because some of us are visual. It lets us actually see all the things that are in front of us, whether that causes overwhelm, peace, whatever it does. At least it gives you the opportunity to decide what is actually important for you and what is not this year. So having that.
I like how you said this year.
This year, right? Because every year is going to be different. Grief is not linear. It is a journey.
Yeah.
And it is this year. It's right now. Doesn't mean you're not going to be feeling that grief next year, but it is right now. So right now, what are you able to do? That might change in 2 weeks. But right now, if we're writing a list when we're literally right before Christmas, it's okay to change that list the day before.
Yeah.
It's okay to change that list after. But I think making the list is really helpful to help us understand what we're actually able to hold.
Yeah, I love that. And get it out. Make the list, but they don't all have to be checked off. I really like that.
No, absolutely not. I think we all make a million lists all the time, especially as parents. And I think we always feel that expectation to have to mark everything off because we failed if we didn't. No, we both know that that's, as much as we'd be like, yeah, I know, we have to mark up everything. No, we don't.
No.
It doesn't have to be perfect. And like we said, this year, right? Maybe that list you do every year at this point, and you're like, oh, how have I grown throughout this year? Or how have I been able to identify my needs and what my boundaries need to be moving forward? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And speaking of like holiday traditions and memories, like, yes, you can definitely continue those traditions without the main, you know, without a person there. And that can be a very lovely way of honoring their memory. And you can also create new traditions.
Yeah.
And it's hard. Again, like that's a difficult moment. That's a difficult transition to go from, you know, old traditions and bringing in new ones. But it will happen. It's a change. It's an adjustment. But it's okay for you to have both.
Yeah.
Some of the history of that family tradition and also bringing in some new things into it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think like bringing those new things in actually give us a way to not only honor maybe that person that you've lost, but it also gives us an opportunity to honor ourselves.
Yeah.
I think we forget that quite often.
Oh, yeah.
Especially in the grieving process, right? We look at it being like, it's supposed to be this way. It's supposed to actually move forward. I mean, not if you're not doing what you need for yourself. You're part of the equation. So I think honoring yourself and actually being able to give attention to multiple different areas, which feels horrible when you're feeling up in the air.
Yeah.
But show up the way you can. Show up for the people that you want to show up for. If that is just a room full of children, great. You're going to have a beautiful time with children laughing that don't understand anything that's going on. Sometimes that's the best thing.
Yeah, having a distraction and space from it.
We're allowed to still distract.
Yeah.
We just have to be...
It's a coping strategy.
Yeah, just have to be mindful of how long we're trying to distract for.
Exactly.
But it's helpful for a reason.
I think new traditions can also be a fun way to get the younger generation involved in it too. Like, I think I shared this in our last episode, but our family has gone through so many different traditions. And yeah, obviously there was a shift and some like, oh man, we're not going to do that anymore feelings, I guess grief of not being able to do some of the old traditions again. But we found so much joy in the new tradition. And who knows how it's going to change in the next couple of years, right? Like that's just part of our, like for me, our family, our, development as a family and all of these different traditions and what they're going to look like. And so, yes, it's sad to think like of my parents getting older, and that's my own grief that I'm, having to deal with. But it is also kind of exciting to see how new traditions are going to be made, and they can be like little simple silly ones. Like I think one year my brothers wanted to have a gingerbread building contest, and we did that. And the next year we did the Kit Kat building house. And, last year I baked gingerbread cookie or like a sugar cookies shaped as little people, and we decorated them. And so like, again, a new tradition was introduced, but there was shifts within that. So yeah, just having space for both the new and the old.
It's interesting that you talk about like guilt in it too. And it made me think of my shift this year. My sister has always kind of spent her own time with either partners or her dad or whatever that looked like over Christmas, but they didn't have a traditional Christmas. So this year I was like, absolutely not. There was like a level of guilt for me that I wasn't really paying attention to the idea that she didn't have the Christmas that like I expected. And I'm sure she's totally happy with her Christmas celebrations. But for me, I was like, no, like she should be able to experience all of these things. She lost her mom at 18. So it really shifted the way that they celebrated. So this year I made it like a point. You're coming over for Christmas. We're doing all these things. We're going to have fun. I want you to be part of it. And that's on me. Like, of course we want our family around, but it's like that little piece of guilt that sits here to be like, no, everybody has to feel the way about Christmas that I hope they would feel. And I talked about in the last episode that I'm not even a huge Christmas person.
Yeah.
But making sure that other people can feel the way that I see other people feel about Christmas is like turned into such an important piece for me that I also have to work through, because the grief of maybe not offering that space for so long is like catching up in a way, because as we get older, I think that connection gets more important. So that's like the shift that I've done this year around that guilt and that grief piece, which is not, for some people, they're going to be like, oh my God, it's fine. That's not a huge thing, but it doesn't have to be. It can be a small, tiny little thing that makes us feel like, oh my gosh, it shouldn't be like that. And we're feeling that grief. And that's my way of trying to work through it, is provide something and give choice for her to want to be there. And she's excited. I'm happy to say she's excited to be there. It's going to be amazing. But I hope that that's something that she looks forward to maybe moving forward, and we can make her part of.
It becomes the new tradition.
That new tradition that you were talking about. It's such a healing thing, a helpful thing, but also can be pushy sometimes. So we have to check in with other people before we push it.
I think that, it is a season of giving. It is a season of togetherness and family and friends and all of these things, which is like, so beautiful that there's that togetherness. And I mean, in so many Christmas movies, there is like inviting the person that is lonely or who's isolated. Like, let's invite them out for the holidays. So it is, again, like a beautiful opportunity for us to build new friendships. Or even if somebody who maybe you're not the one who's grieving the loss of somebody, but that somebody, a friend, a neighbor, somebody's going through a loss, having that, like, reaching out to them for support, invitation, whatever it could be within your capacity, can be a really beautiful thing that we do over the holidays. And like you said, still give that person choice. They can be like, nah, thanks, I'm gonna just hang out at home by myself, but thank you for the offer, and that's fine. Or it might be like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. I haven't had a traditional holiday in a long time. So it can be a really beautiful thing too that can happen and bring people together.
It's interesting. And maybe, I don't know, I think maybe quickly we can go over some of the ways to maybe give attention to some of these areas that we might be struggling with. I know we talked about a few of them, but there's always like a long list of how we can cope with these things.
I mean, we talked about a couple. So if you're feeling that, that grief, making space for it, setting a timer, putting some sad music on, allowing yourself space to be in your emotion, and then doing something for self-care or distraction. We talked about getting our anger and aggression out in a way that isn't harmful for us or other people, or damaging to our lovely furniture in our house. But what are some other grief coping skills?
I think I often talk about to be able to expect the unexpected. Like, be prepared for the fact that it's not going to go your way, and make peace with that. We can prepare, like we said before, over and over again. It's not going to make a difference, right? And I think the one thing I want to actually reiterate with that is, regardless of anybody you're seeing, whether it's a therapist, friends that have been through the same thing, family members that claim to be an expert at a grieving process, at the grieving stuff, at coping, all of these things, the only expert on grief is you. You are the only person that's going to be able to actually grieve the way that you need to, because you're the only person that knows what you're feeling. And I think that learning that first helps us learn one day at a time when we're trying to move forward with that. You don't have to listen to everybody else. You have to listen to you. Part of that, I guess, understanding and learning at least puts you in the right position to be able to work through all of those other coping tools. I mean, I find personally, I'm a little bit more of the introverted when I go to coping with grief. And I also cope with grief over the holidays with loved ones that we have lost. And I talked about a little bit in the last episode about family and the way that tradition sat around Christmas because of my mother-in-law. For me, I've went full force into pleasing other people, which works for me in some favor, but it also has turned into a little bit more of an expectation on myself that is not always the best, because now I'm like, oh my gosh, the lights have to be perfect, it has to be on, it has to be Christmassy all the time. It doesn't. So I'm trying to actually, every day I get back home and I look at this Christmas stuff and go, okay, I still have to do this, I still have to do this. Kind of just take a step back and enjoy the lights that are on and the stuff that's out and the movies. Christmas movie. I'm not a Christmas person, but I will watch Christmas movies with my child.
They're fun.
I'm trying to bring myself into a little bit more of a cozy atmosphere, because even if I don't like Christmas in itself, I do really love the way that it brings comfort around my family. So I'm really pulling on those pieces that are speaking to me. It doesn't have to be about Christmas. It has to be about the comfort you're feeling, and it has to be about the ability that you are able to hold things.
The one thing that you said is the one way to cope or distract from the feelings that you are having around grief is to help other people. And that, again, that's a wonderful way to cope. And being mindful
Yeah.
of your expectations around it. Because while like going to, volunteer at a soup kitchen over the holidays, it makes you feel good. You're meeting new people, you're supporting other people, you're, doing something that maybe aligns with your values and it feels good, and it's distracting or bringing in more joyful emotions that maybe you haven't felt in a while. If we put this pressure on ourselves to do it perfectly or to show up in this way all the time, then it's actually, yes, it's distracting, but now it's adding more heavier emotions into it. So I really love your honesty of being like, I want to go and help, but then I put this pressure on myself to do it all perfectly and to, be that people pleaser and do it this way for everybody. But I do think that like doing something charitable, volunteering, like those are really helpful ways that we can cope and distract. And obviously with coping through grief, it's also general coping tools like deep breathing, exercise, mindfulness, journaling, talking to a loved one, going to therapy. Like all of these things are going to be helpful. Listening to music, drawing, like we can list a million things. It's really figuring out what works for you. And as we've pointed out, broken records around emotions, but you need to make space to at least label your emotions to understand how you're feeling. I do want to take a moment to talk to those folks who have loved ones that are grieving, because I think, or who are also grieving, I think there can be a lot of expectation that there's one right way to grieve.
Yeah.
And one thing that you said was nobody knows your grief or how you're feeling except you. Other people are experiencing grief, but they might feel different. There may be different emotions. There may be a different reaction that they have to the grief. And so if you are also experiencing a grief with other people, or you're the one that has like people around you who are experiencing grief, be mindful of your expectations. When my grandpa passed, I wasn't a huge crier about it. It was sad, but I didn't cry. I went into caretaker mode, took care of my brothers while my parents went to go see, my grandpa at the hospital, say their goodbyes. I chose to not do that. And I didn't cry. I printed pictures of him, made a little like a collage thing and put it up in my room. And that was my way of grieving. But there was a lot of comments from other people being like, oh, Yvonne didn't cry. She doesn't care that her grandpa just died. And like all of these things. And so please be mindful that everybody grieves differently. The way you grieve might not be the same way that another person close to you grieves. And so giving that person the space to grieve in their own way, as long as it's, somewhat healthy, not, using unhealthy coping skills or coping strategies. Like it's okay for everyone to have different ways of coping.
Yeah. And I like that you said that, because when we lose somebody, like we've all lost that person. Many people are losing that one person, but no one relationship is the same, right? We all had a different relationship with that person.
Yeah.
That's a father for somebody, a grandfather, a son, all of these different things. And it doesn't matter if you're a son, daughter, mother, father, grandfather. We connect very differently in life, very uniquely. We're going to grieve differently when the relationship we built was already unique to the person we are. So we can't expect, and I hear it all the time, this person is supposed to be over it. This person is supposed to be the same as me. I don't know why I'm grieving this way. Because you had a different connection with that person, and that is okay. But expecting yourself or others to grieve the same way is doing such a disservice, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's important that you brought that up, and I'm happy that it's at least brought to light.
Yeah. So in whatever way you are experiencing the holidays, if you're grieving, we shared some tools. We also have some blog posts on our website that kind of goes through some of these things. If you feel like reading some of those and practicing them, we'll put those in the show notes. But throughout the holidays, I hope that you're gentle with yourself. I hope that you take some time to pause and be in the moment, to feel the joy or allow yourself to feel the joy, or to, be gentle with yourself in other ways and give yourself what you are needing. And is there any...
And I hope that everybody has happy holiday, Merry Christmas, whatever that does look like for you.
Yeah.
Hope to talk to everybody in the new year.
Ooh, I'm excited for the episodes we have coming up in the new year. We have some great topics. And so thank you so much for a wonderful 2024. We hope you and your family have a wonderful holiday season, and we will see you guys in 2025. Bye. Thank you for listening to Outside the Therapy Room. This podcast is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. If you reside in Ontario and are interested in working with one of our therapists, please visit our website in the show notes. If you reside outside of Ontario, a quick Google search or search through Psychology Today will help you find a therapist near you.